saw a lot of teams get creative at this year's trade deadline, not just getting guys on expiring deals, but acquiring players that still had one more, 2 or 3 more full years left of club control. Rockies had a couple of those guys. Cal Quantrill having one more year. Austin Gomber, I don't think had a ton more value, but Jacob Stallings has played great for them. They like how he handles the pitching staff, so that has value. But if we're only talking about a couple months of a backup catcher versus, a prospect that can maybe provide you some depth that you really could have used in 2023 and contributed to that 100 loss season, and a lack of depth that contributed to what will be another 100 loss season, they just don't seem to be learning from their mistakes because their formula on the business side is working.
Welcome into another edition of On the Record here in Studio K, presented by Circle K. We are talking about the Diamondbacks' upcoming series against the Colorado Rockies, and who better to join us than a longtime friend of the show, the one and only Patrick Lyons. Patrick, we appreciate your time today. And this Colorado Rockies team, Patrick, is kind of riding high right now. They were down, I believe it was 8-2 to the Atlanta Braves going to the bottom of the 8th inning yesterday. And they scored 7 runs in the bottom half of that 8th inning, wind up coming back and winning the game 9-8. And they take 2 out of 3 from a pretty good Braves team.
Colorado, you can't expect anything out of them other than the unknown because that's what they give you, especially at home. I know Diamondbacks fans have seen it over the years many times, but when you play a game at Coors Field, you have to prepare for the unexpected, and that's exactly what happened on Sunday against an Atlanta club that had absolutely owned the Rockies, had a 9-game winning streak going into the weekend, and though they didn't have their best arms going out there, they had that solid bullpen, and the Rockies were kind of scrapping after losing 2 out of 3 against the Mets. They had a somewhat rough road trip, 3-city stop, and the series was ripe for the taking, but you got to get all 27 outs or else you can't call that a true victory.
I guess the other part of the equation is that the Atlanta Braves have very much been struggling lately. That's sort of its own storyline in and of itself. But sticking with this Rockies team, Patrick, I mean, I guess it's not just this most recent series win. They've won 5 out of their last 10 games. They did win a game in the Padres series. I think they took 2 out of 3 from the Angels a week or two ago. What is it right now that's just kind of helping the Rockies be competent, be maybe a little bit more stable than we've seen earlier in the season?
They've gotten some better starting pitching has been one of the helpful things. Now, that being said, they've had a couple players banged up. Herman Marquez has been shut down for the rest of the year. Kyle Freeland did leave the game on Sunday with blister issues once again. Ryan Feltner just went on the IL. So now they are all of a sudden struggling with starting pitching, but every day they're putting out their best lineup, and they definitely have a no-quit kind of attitude. You see that with a player who's critical for them. If Diamondbacks fans want a player to worry about that you don't think you need to worry about, it's Jake Cave. He always seems to be at the front of any kind of rally, and even in Sunday's game, he comes up and Colorado's down 8-2, and he hits a simple 2-run home run. You think that's nothing, but that's what starts the momentum. That's what builds that 7-run rally. So Cave has been one of those veterans that has the never say die kind of attitude and allows them to hang around in some of these games. And when they have their top 3 guys in the bullpen going on the same day, that gives them a much better chance. Any other day, it becomes a lot more challenging for them to themselves get those 27 outs.
The Rockies do have several position players that I think are clearly good players, right? Like Ezequiel Tovar is a really solid shortstop. He has, I believe it's a 105 OPS plus, just a little above average there. Brenton Doyle has really come on strong this season. I remember last year, Patrick, we were talking about Brenton Doyle being the worst hitter in all of baseball, at least among guys who were getting significant playing time. And you look up this year, and he has a 113 OPS plus. I believe he just won the NL Player of the Month award in July over one Eugenio Suarez, which was Diamondbacks fans were like, who won the Player of the Month award? Brenton Doyle has been really good offensively, and he also is one of the best center fielders in all of baseball, obviously coming off a Gold Glove win last year. Has this been, I guess this is sort of a breakout year in a lot of ways for him.
Yeah, both Doyle and Tovar are really the 2 bright spots in the second half Rockies have promised to call up some new bodies, some young players to help get them back into relevance just a little bit. Victor Vodnik out of the closer's role has been another one of those bright spots to keep an eye on. But Brenton Doyle is the number one player where after every game, he's always doing something, whether it's defensively, as you said, probably in line for his second Gold Glove award in center field. Talked with Bud Black this week about he might even be in the conversation to win the Platinum Glove award this year in the
Sure.
NL. So I think he's in that conversation. But in the offseason, he worked on some things with his swing to really make those adjustments because he was barely hitting above the Mendoza line. Got a cup of coffee in AAA in 2022. At the beginning of 2023, ran into a wall. He's a hard-nosed player. He's built like an NFL safety. And it ran into a wall down in AAA, and that cost him some time there in April before they called him up and said, whatever we get from his bat is fine. We just need his defense in center field. And that was still an absolute boon. But this offseason, he worked on a couple things. We're starting to see that power and that contact increase over last season. Just on Friday, he hit home run number 20. And on Saturday, stole base number 22. So
Hmm.
only the 10th player in Rockies history to go 2020. And when asked if 30-30 was on the table, he said, yeah, it's still in play, especially if he has another month like he did in July and can steal another player of the month award like he did from Gino. I think it's very possible that he becomes only the fourth player in Rockies history to go 30-30 and the first since Larry Walker in his 1997 MVP season.
Looking at the pitching matchups for the series, we have Brandon Pfaadt against Cal Quantrill going tonight. It's Eduardo Rodriguez making his second start with the Diamondbacks. Of course, he just returned from injury. He'll start Tuesday against Austin Gomber. Then we have Jordan Montgomery against right-hander Tanner Gordon, expected to throw on Wednesday. Patrick, I guess Quantrill and Gomber, D-backs fans probably somewhat familiar with them. Tanner Gordon is maybe a less familiar name. I think he's made 5 starts, something like that this season. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, Gordon's been a pleasant surprise. They acquired him last year at the trade deadline for Pierce Johnson. It was kind of funny on Friday. He gets to start against Atlanta, 5 innings, gives up 2 runs, but doesn't walk any and struck out 7 against his former team. And then in the ninth, Victor Vodnik, who also came over in that Pierce Johnson trade, gets the save. So Gordon's been good. Bud Black has talked about Gordon being a player in consideration for next year's starting rotation. Kind of remains to be seen because they do have a cluttered rotation right now of 5 veterans, many of which you named: Marquez, Senzatella, Freeland, all of those guys coming back for 2025. So Gordon's trying to make a name for himself, and he's been doing a solid job in general. Gomber, after a solid start on the road, had a hiccup this past week, so not sure which Austin Gomber the Rockies are going to get. And then for today's game, it's not going to be Cal Quantrill. He
Oh,
had his start pushed back on Saturday, and it seemed as if we're going to push him back 2 days, and then uh, he had some general forearm soreness, and Bud Black said that no, he's not going to make his start on Monday. We're just kind of pushing him back indefinitely. So there's a lot of sources out there that still show Cal Quantrill as being that guy. We don't really know who's going to start on Monday because there's only one player on the 40-man roster right now that's a starting pitcher. They've got a bunch of long relievers who've started in the minors, but he used all of those guys up over the weekend. So the
hmm.
only one left is Bradley Blaylock, who I think only played once with Milwaukee earlier this year. He came over in that Nick Mears trade. So I can't give you too much on Bradley Blaylock, only that he's been okay in 2 starts at Double-A Hartford. So we're kind of waiting for that transaction to go down, unless Cal Quantrill makes a miraculous recovery and he does end up starting. But it sounds like they're going to wait for him to start back at home in Colorado against the Padres this upcoming weekend.
Well, you mentioned Nick Mears, which brings me to the topic of the trade deadline and what the Rockies did, or I guess really didn't do. Obviously, the Rockies have sort of had a reputation over the last few years as being the team that probably should sell and doesn't really sell, or maybe make small moves like the Nick Mears trade, but nothing super significant. Granted, this isn't a team that had a ton of pieces that contending teams are going to be looking for. But, a Cal Quantrill, obviously, I guess he's hurt now. I imagine he was healthy back at the trade deadline. He has a 100 ERA plus, at least something around there. He could be a kind of a league average innings eater potentially for a team. Elias Diaz, I know, is on an expiring contract, and they opted not to move him. Why is it that the Rockies just sort of year after year continue to? I don't know. I don't know what their thinking is here. Why aren't they trying to sell off these pieces?
They are a very complicated club, to say the least. They value their players incredibly highly, so there can be a conflict when communicating with another team as to the actual value of that player. Getting another team on the phone can also be a challenge at times when you really act as that kid who's hanging out in the corner by themselves, and you've got teams that maybe want to make a transaction with the Rockies, but there's a fear that you get into the conversation, you have an agreement, and then at the last minute, the owner can step in and nullify that deal. That actually ended up happening in, I believe it was 2015 with Eduardo Rodriguez, where he was an upcoming prospect with the Baltimore Orioles, and Peter Gammons had reported that there was a deal that was struck where Jorge De La Rosa was going to go to Baltimore for Eduardo Rodriguez. De La Rosa
Wow.
going to be a free agent the next year or that offseason. So they could have re-signed him, but owner Dick Monfort, according to Peter Gammons, squashed that deal and said, no, we don't want to trade this guy. They're loyal to their players. So they lose out on a top prospect that ended up pitching really well and having a solid career with the Boston Red Sox, all because they preferred 2 months of a guy on an expiring contract that, in theory, they could have re-signed in the offseason over 6+ years of a rookie prospect starting pitcher. So that's part of their evaluation process. I think you make a good point about how much can some of those Rockies players that were available, how much can they impact a postseason roster?
Yeah.
We saw a lot of teams get creative at this year's trade deadline, not just getting guys on expiring deals, but acquiring players that still had one more, 2 or 3 more full years left of club control. Rockies had a couple of those guys. Cal Quantrill having one more year. Austin Gomber, I don't think had a ton more value, but Jacob Stallings has played great for them. They like how he handles the pitching staff, so that has value. But if we're only talking about a couple months of a backup catcher versus a prospect that can maybe provide you some depth that you really could have used in 2023 and contributed to that 100 loss season, and a lack of depth that contributed to what will be another 100 loss season, they just don't seem to be learning from their mistakes because their formula on the business side is working. You look at that ballpark. I mean, how many
Yeah.
times do you and I message each other saying, how many people were at that game? There are 46,000 people in Denver watching a baseball game against a, still really solid Atlanta team and maybe an up and coming Rockies club. The business plan is not broken in that way, so they don't necessarily have to change their practices and change how they evaluate their players, how they evaluate other teams' players, and figure out a way to really get this thing back on track.
Well, I don't think the Rockies will be winning the NL West. I feel fairly comfortable saying that they're 44-75 at this point in the season.
Ever, or
Uh,
are we just talking about this year?
yeah. Just this year,
But maybe ever?
maybe next year the Rockies will win the NL West. I like their chances, Patrick. I think it's possible. But yeah, shifting gears to just some NL West talk in general here. Uh, Things have gotten a little crazy, Patrick. Things have gotten a little bit more interesting. I think we've all kind of made the assumption that the Dodgers were going to win this division, and that seemed like a pretty safe bet as of a month ago. That no longer seems like a guarantee, right? Both the Diamondbacks and Padres now 3.5 games behind the Dodgers in the NL West. I know you've obviously covered an NL West team for a while, as have I. We're both pretty familiar with this division. What's your sense of the NL West right now, Patrick? Do you think that the Diamondbacks or the Padres really have a legitimate shot here?
I think they do, for the simple fact that the Dodgers just aren't getting it done. Going into this season, I like the Diamondbacks a lot more than the Padres because the Padres have been suspect. I know they had their run to the NLCS in 2022, but other than that, they've had this core of players, these superstars that just haven't really been able to figure out. The chemistry just wasn't right, and even with Mike Schilt, they had that rough start. So I
Right.
don't know if any manager can really put that in the right direction. So with the Diamondbacks and everything that they were able to do, last year and getting a chance to see that firsthand last October. And the genius of Torey Lovullo was great. And then the reinvestment back into the roster with all of the signings. Diamondbacks seemed like they were going to be a legitimate threat should the Dodgers slip up, and the Dodgers have slipped up. And then if the Diamondbacks, didn't have their own slip up, their own injury issues, as I know you guys have been covering, all season long, I think we could have probably seen in a different world, in a different timeline, a healthy Diamondbacks club in first place right now, because the Dodgers, they've had their own issues, they've had their own injury concerns that
Right.
have kind of derailed their season. Mookie Betts obviously being number one, but I still think there's a chance that the Diamondbacks could pull ahead of the Dodgers. The Dodgers, look, their fate is in their own hands, literally, physically, figuratively, because they're in first place, and all they got to do is win out, in theory, right? Uh, but they still have the better team, I believe, than the Diamondbacks. But
Sure.
look, there's a reason why we play the games, because it's not given just on paper, where you decide, hey, this team is better than the other team. You actually have to play those games, and because of that, I think the Diamondbacks have a way more legitimate shot of winning the NL West than the San Diego Padres.
What would be truly chaotic is if the San Francisco Giants wound up taking the third wild card spot, and then we had four of the six playoff teams in the National League all coming from the NL West. On that note, Patrick, I want to ask you, D-backs Padres, like they're both 4 games up on the third wild card spot right now that's currently occupied by the Atlanta Braves. The Mets are half a game out. Both the Cardinals and Giants are a game and a half out of that spot. The Cubs 3 games out. They've kind of re-entered the picture. Who do you like at that third wild card spot out of all those teams? It's a pretty tough call as of right now.
Well, of the three wild card clubs, the Diamondbacks would be the one I feel the most confident about, where I'd put them in as a lock. And even with the Padres having a 4+ game lead over the fourth wild card, or the fourth wild card spot, anything could happen with the Padres still. So I'm not totally convinced. I know they're super hot right now, 8-2 over their last 10, but I'm not totally convinced of that. I really thought the Mets were going to be okay, and they've kind of figured some things out. I think Atlanta will end up settling down just a little bit after
Sure.
their recent rough patch. The Cardinals, I think they're barely holding on for life. The Giants are interesting, right? Blake Snell has been that guy that has finally come into his own. He didn't really have much of a spring training. I think that is what caused some of the injuries. That's really what caused his slow start in general. So the Giants, I think, teams probably should be a little bit more fearful of, a lot more so than the Cubs, who, again, they've got the pieces on paper. They've got a lot of veteran guys on that squad, but I would probably go Diamondbacks, Atlanta, and gosh, yeah, go ahead and give me the New York Metropolitans.
Wow. So you're saying the Padres fall out entirely?
Yeah, look, I picked them to
Wow.
win the NL West in 2023. So if they're gonna make me look bad, you know what? I'm gonna do everything I can to make them look bad. No, it's not personal, but I just have my concerns, because they haven't gotten it done up to this point. And sure, yes, here we are, October 12th. You say, oh, they're the fifth best team, or tied for the fourth best team in the National League. Okay, that's a snapshot. But when we get to the end of the year, game 162, are they going to be there? Their starting rotation, there's just the questions about that. The bullpen is incredibly strong, so
Yeah.
maybe you don't need that rotation to be as good as you would normally, since you're shortening games to only 6 innings with that super bullpen out there. And Tatis, Machado, maybe they figured it out, but I think I've believed in them for far too long. I think a lot of people have that. They're going to have to do some heavy lifting. So I'd bet against them before I'd say, yeah, they're a slam dunk, no doubt, wild card team.
Well, we will see what happens here over the next 7 weeks. Patrick, always a pleasure having you. Be sure, everyone watching, listening, follow Patrick on Twitter at Patrick D. Lyons. I had a feeling this was going to happen at some point during the show. Derek couldn't help himself. He
What's
wanted
up,
to say
brother?
hi. So
I miss you. I miss you.
Love you, buddy.
You can also find Patrick's work covering the Rockies at Rockies_insider. Patrick has a new YouTube channel launched with a lot of great content. So if you're interested, I don't know how many Diamondbacks fans are necessarily dying to go deep on the Rockies, but especially during this 3-game series with the Rockies in town, if you want to know anything about this Rockies team, be sure to find it over there at Rockies Insider on YouTube. Patrick, thanks again for hopping on. We really appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Jesse. This is fun.